Jamie recently shared scenes between him and Dakota that left him haunted and unforgettable. Jamie Dornan sipped his coffee slowly, the morning sunlight filtering through the large sash windows of his temporary London apartment. The thin rays of light painted a pale yellow border on the grey carpet, like a reminder that no matter how much he tried to avoid it, the light would eventually find him. But today, Jamie wasn't looking for the light. He was looking for something else, something that had been nagging at his mind for weeks, refusing to let him rest. He set his coffee down on the glass table, looking out the window that faced the still bustling London streets. Footsteps, cars, birds somewhere. Everything was normal, but inside Jamie, something was trembling slightly. 2 weeks ago, Jamie Dornan was invited to an internal screening of his upcoming film, which he starred in alongside Dakota Johnson. The film was considered an emotional turning point for Jamie. The script required him to act out very deep, very dark psychological scenes. There are moments where Jamie plays a wounded man from the past, trying to hide his pain, but that pain will surface in sudden moments, forcing his character to confront himself. During that internal screening, Jamie had never seen the full cut of the scene between him and Dakota. There were 2 scenes, called Scene 27 and Scene 43, that were cut separately for the pre-screening because the director wanted to get the actors' opinions. Jamie thought it would be easier to watch a few scenes again, just selected scenes, but he should have known that some scenes were not meant to be watched alone, when his soul was still vulnerable. Scene 27, Dakota Johnson plays a woman named Elise, who was childhood friends with Jamie's character, Lucas. As young adults, Lucas and Elise were together starting in their teens, sharing everything, promises, secrets, dreams. But Elise leaves, leaving Lucas with unspoken words and shattered hopes. In Scene 27, Lucas finds Elise in the old room where they used to study, talk late into the night, laugh by their rivers of hair. Elise sits quietly in the rocking chair by the window, the dawn streaming in, but her eyes seem to see nothing but the space between them. Lucas stands across from her, his voice trembling. "Why did you leave me like that?" Elise is silent. Then, she turns away to look out the window, her fingers lightly stroking the fogged glass. The air in the room is thick as if every breath is heavy. Jamie remembers acting that scene. When Lucas says, "Why did you leave me like that?" He tries to keep his composure, but his eyes are filled with tears. Guilt, regret, love, despair, all of it is intertwined. As the camera panned to Elise's face, Jamie saw clearly her red eyes, the shadow of the unspoken farewell, the unspoken words, the unhealed pain. Scene 43. This is the scene that Jamie said was unforgettable. It was a night scene, in a dimly lit room, with only the street lights from outside shining through the window, creating thin streaks of light falling on Elise's face. Lucas sat on the bed, Elise stood beside him, silent. After a long moment of silence, Elise walked over and touched Lucas's shoulder. "Elise," softly, "I thought if we had never met, maybe, you wouldn't have hurt." Lucas turned to look at her, his eyes filled with disappointment. "You think you can save me? You just make me miss you." The conflicting feelings in Jamie were forgiveness, resentment, longing. As the camera panned to Lucas, Jamie remembered feeling his heart constrict, the character's soul teetering on the edge between hope and despair, between the desire to hold on and the fear of being abandoned again. After the private screening, as the crowd dispersed, Jamie sat in the small screening room. The screen was still, with only the final credits looming. But in his head, Scene 43 kept replaying over and over again, Elise's hand on Lucas's shoulder, the dim light, her short breath. He couldn't forget Elise's eyes, couldn't forget her sadness and the words, "You think you can save me? You just make me remember." Back home, Jamie couldn't sleep. He closed his eyes, hoping for a peaceful sleep, but the images of that night kept playing in his mind, Dakota's, Elise's, small touch on the shoulder, the brief silence before the words, the wavering in his eyes when he knew Elise couldn't do anything to heal the wound Lucas carried. He stepped into the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, hoping that the coldness of the water would numb the feeling. But no, the feeling still hurt, still alive. Under the pale yellow light, Jamie looked at himself in the mirror, saw his face more tired than usual, his eyes filled with traces of a sleepless night. In the days that followed, Jamie tried to face the haunting feeling. Whenever he thought of Lucas's version in scene 43, of being missed, abandoned, and guilty that Elise had left too, unable to keep her promise, he felt like he was being pulled back to a place deep in his soul where memories passed like ghosts. He began to write in a diary, jotting down every detail he remembered, the sound of Elise's breath as she said, "You think you can save me?" Lucas's blink as he tried to hide his tears, the way the light on Elise's face highlighted the crow's feet at the corners of her eyes, a sign of time, a sign of physical pain. One night, Jamie called the film director and asked if he could see the full cut of scene 43, because he felt he had to look back, to understand why it hurt so much. The director replied that they were still editing the sound and lighting, and it wasn't finished. And so Jamie continued to feel the waiting, an uneasy feeling, like when you know a storm is coming but you don't know when. One rainy evening, as London raindrops pelted the windows, Jamie decided to do what he initially thought was stupid. He went to the apartment where Elise, Dakota Johnson, had filmed the scenes. He wanted to feel the air again, to see the light, to hear the rain tapping on the window like in the movie. If he could, he wanted to overcome the ghost. He parked the taxi outside the small street, stepped over the carpet of wet leaves. The air was damp, the cold seeping through his coat. He stood in front of the large window where Elise had sat looking out. In his mind, Jamie saw Elise still sitting there, the street lights and the beams of light from the living room across the street dancing on her face. He stood outside, looking in, but she wasn't there. There was only silence, only the atmosphere they had created for the scene. Jamie closed his eyes, took a deep breath. In his mind, the scene appeared, Elise standing by the bed, the night light flickering, the rain tapping outside the window. Every word rang out clearly, every touch. Then Jamie remembered the first day he met Dakota on set. The moment she stepped onto the set, the light streaming through the eaves, her hair blowing in the wind. The way she looked around, dreamy and a little scared, so different from the Elise of the scene, but also like the Elise Lucas remembered. Jamie remembers thinking, she can make any scene feel real. But he didn't know that later, when he was shooting scene 43, being real would mean letting himself be vulnerable. One night, Jamie lay in bed, his phone beside him. He turned it on, found Dakota Johnson's number, but then circled the dial, didn't press call. Talking might make things clearer, or it might shatter the butterflies in his stomach. He thought about how she would listen to him, how she might say, "Jamie, it's just a movie." But then, would saying, "It's just a movie," lessen the pain? Make it seem insignificant, when it was, in his heart, so real? Jamie decided to write to Dakota, not send, but write. Write all the things he couldn't say, all the haunting images, her face in the darkness, Lucas's eyes when he knew Elise was leaving again, the words that echoed in the silence. He wrote, "Elise, I can't forget the light in your eyes as you stood by the bed. I can't forget the touch of your hand on my shoulder, as if to hold on, as if to say, I'm still here, if you want me to be here. But you were silent too. And our silence was heavier than any words. I realized you didn't leave because you didn't want to, but because you couldn't. You thought you could save me, but I lived in the darkness of unspoken hope. Maybe somewhere outside the movie, outside the lights, you could see me, not Lucas, but Jamie, and tell me I was okay." That this pain would pass. If you wanted me to. He left the letter on his desk, unsent, just to look at it at night if he couldn't sleep. The next day, a cameraman refilmed scene 43, adjusted the lighting, adjusted the sound, even added a few close-ups. Jamie and Dakota were back in set, acting again. When the camera came on, Dakota looked at Jamie, and Jamie sensed she understood, not just the role, but what was emerging inside him. There was respect in that look, sadness, and perseverance. When the director said, "Cut," Jamie stood there, still looking at Dakota. She nodded slightly, saying nothing. Jamie stepped out of the frame. His mind was in transition. He knew these scenes would be included in the final cut of the film. And he knew, when the film came out, maybe a lot of people would see scene 43, would find it real, would be moved, as he was being moved right now. Another evening, Jamie went to a press test. In the dark, the screen started. The film gradually increased the audience of Lucas and Ellis's story, sweet memories, loud laughter, kisses in the rain, then separation, then finding, but not to completely heal. Warning 43 came. Warning Hong and her talked in silence, dim lights, footsteps outside the window, loud rain. Lucas said, "Do you think you can love me?" Elise was silent. He said, "You just make me miss you." Jamie looked at Dakota on screen. She acted until the viewer time continued in one beat. When the lights in the theater came up at the end of the movie, Jamie felt something snap, not pain, not despair, but a small release. Because he realized that what had scared him was not the scene, but the way it had forced him to confront the truth inside, the longing, the grief, the unspoken love. After the screening, as everyone left the theater, Jamie waited for Dakota outside. She came out, her coat in hand, her hair slightly wet from the light rain outside. He walked over, a little nervous. 100 questions filled his mind, but his lips were dry. Would she understand what he had felt? Would she also retain this image as a beautiful shadow in her soul? Dakota looked at him, her eyes less anxious, her breath smiling. "Jamie, scene 43, everyone will remember it." It was so real. Jamie felt like his time was over. He nodded. He felt like his time was over. He nodded. "Thank you, Dakota. Thank you for making it real. Even the ability to make you, well, to make me hurt." She put her hand on his shoulder, very relieved. The head is part of the truth. If it doesn't hurt, it's not memorable. He looked at her, and in that moment of resolution, Jamie understood that the image at that moment wasn't certain to be held forever. It could be a reminder, a trace, a pain that made us know we lived, loved, lost, and could still go on. He took a deep breath, smelled Dakota's coat, the cold after the rain, the street lights reflecting on her face, all of it blended into a memory that wouldn't fade. Back home, Jamie sat in front of the window, looking out at the London streets. The yellow flashlights flickered, the last gentle raindrops falling on the glass. He opened the unsent letter, rereading his own writing. "Maybe somewhere out there in the movie, out of the lights, you'll see me, not Lucas, but Jamie, and tell me I'm okay." Jamie folded the letter. He wouldn't send it, probably wouldn't be able to send it now. But he kept it as proof that he'd looked his ghost in the eye, that he'd known pain, and still wasn't afraid to love something even if it meant making her remember it forever.